Welcome to the Property Legends series, and this series is brought to you by Quoin Online and the Urban Real Estate Research Unit at the University of Cape Town. The main focus of the series is really to have discussions with property legends, people who have had a major impact on the South African property market. And we're very pleased to have with us today Martin Wragge, a visionary. And I think it's important in the property market. It is about the nitty-gritties, the finance, but I think much of being in property as well is being able to see something in front of you, to be able to see a project to completion. Martin, welcome. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Francois. Rob.
Thank you. How did you get into property? Where did it all start?
Well, I'm not sure this is the most interesting part of the journey, but it starts way back. I had a career briefly for about 5 years in journalism. And as such, I became the deputy finance editor of the Daily News, and as such, I started the first property supplement in newspaper history in this country. That led to an exposure to the broking community and developers in Durban. And I was invited by Aubrey Lurie, a very prominent broker, to join his company, and that I did in 1970. I think I must have been 21 or thereabouts. So I was very fortunate in actually being able to put together my very first shopping centre development within the first 5 months of joining Aubrey's office under his auspices. But I phoned Raymond Ackerman, who then had one store in Natal, in Westville, and I said, I have this place for a shopping centre and you're the ideal tenant. And he said, well, I'll be there in a week or two. I met him at the airport, drove him to the site. And I had absolutely no idea what I was doing or what I was trying to put together, other than here I had a supermarket, I had Raymond Ackerman, legend of his time, and continues to be so. And he then started telling me, well, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to get architects. And I said, okay, this is good. And he gave me the name of an architect. It happened to be Lenny Bentel of Bentel Abramson. I got hold of Lenny Bentel, then he came to Durban, and the first shopping centre was born in the hands of many. It was rather like a...
And what was the shopping centre?
Montclair.
Oh, okay.
It was a small convenience centre. Okay. And Pick n Pay were the principal tenant. So that was how I got into it. I was then recruited by the Phil Morkel organisation, which was then a listed company, servicing 7 retail brands and opening stores. We were opening about 100 stores a year. And I was doing the negotiation to open the stores and close the bad ones. Always more difficult than opening the good ones or the new ones. That was really an interesting ride. Did a lot of growing in that time. Got to understand retail, got to see what was working, interfaced with many developers, and realized that actually they didn't understand what we as retailers needed. Right. And so I started working actually with Lenny Bentel and Dennis Abrams, and saying, guys, I don't think you should do that. I think, if you did this, it would help us. It would be better for us as retailers. So I was taking stores in their evolving package of shopping centres, and they were doing a lot of shopping centres. But they were very smart guys, very, very smart guys. So I learned a great deal, and it was a wonderful learning curve. So moving on from Morkel's, eventually I wound up, it's a bit circuitous. I had a brief position in London with the Burton Tailoring Group, again in leasing capacity, opening stores, closing stores. And then I joined the Leon Pascal organisation in Cape Town, which was deep into Trust Bank. And one day Leon said to me, I'm going to Canada for a little visit. And kind of like, here are the keys, and please do what you need to do. And off he went. And within a couple of days, I had Anke Berger, who was then the CEO of Trust Bank, marching into my office and sitting down and saying, well, where's everybody? So that was interesting. There was a developer, Leon, who was a builder by background, a very good builder, a good contractor, but it was that age when money was easy. And Leon started building shopping centers all over Cape Town and built one after the other. He had projects going on all over the place. But these things were not correctly conceived. And as such, things were done at retail level, which were just appalling. Today would never be contemplated. And I was saddled with this lot, and I started ripping these buildings apart and trying to put them back together again. And then moving on, I went and made some motion pictures. Then I came back into the real estate business. I joined Trust Property Corporation, right, which had then absorbed all of the Leon Pascal stuff. And I was once again back into tearing that stuff apart, which I'd started so many years before. I joined Trust Bank. I became their development manager, reporting to the board. A period of tremendous growth, because I was able to play with lots of failed structures. When was this about? 78 to 1980. Okay. So what we were doing was they had a collection of 220 odd major properties, biggest portfolio in the country at that time. But they were all failed properties. They are properties that Trust Bank had to take on board. So I had this wonderful collection of broken toys, and I was able to run around and start pulling them apart with money from the bank and putting them back together again to see whether I could make them work. And it taught me a great deal, and I learned a great deal at the wheel, so to speak. In 1980, I met Christo Visa, and we established a company called Monex, on a 50-50 joint venture basis. And that was quite interesting, because the way that partnership came about was Christo said, okay, the way this happens is I will underwrite an overdraft of 15,000 Rand at the bank. You will underwrite half. I will underwrite half. When it gets to 15,000, I have the right to pull the plug, and that is the end of that. So for the next 8 months, I didn't draw a salary, and we gradually, slowly got off the ground, and Monex evolved from those beginnings.
And Century City.
And Tiger Valley and Century City and about 20 other shopping centers.
If you were to reflect over those years and the major changes that we've seen, especially in the retail environment. I mean, there is a sense, I don't know how you think about it, that we've gone from the cafe to the regionals, and we're almost moving back into this neighborhood. Your reflections of those years.
Okay, I think the general arc of that is correct, in the sense that in the last 30 years, what we've seen is the rise of the super regionals, and these important machines took over and dominated the 90s and I guess the first 10 years and more of this century. But what we have here is a very changing kind of environment, I think accelerated by COVID, which has changed the dynamics completely and is accelerating e-commerce in particular, which is a major a point of change in the way things are going to be in the future. The super regionals, of which I built 2 of the 6 or 7 biggest in the country, when I say the team and I, so get that in context. What you've got today is, if you're in essential retailing, then you are more essential than ever before. Right. But if you are in discretionary retail, you are more discretionary than ever before. And as a change, what I see is that the line shop components, as we move from the brand age to the product age, where branding is less important and people are smart enough to look at a T-shirt and say, reasonable product, I don't need to pay twice as much for it.
Right.
So we're moving from that branding age to a product age. With these changes, you're going to see a major shriveling of the discretionary end of retailing. As such, all the small tenants that make major shopping centers, super regionals, viable and underpin the viabilities, basically, because you're not getting that underpin from the major tenants who are paying too little rent per square meter.
Are you talking about the moms and pops and bigger?
It's the moms and pops actually that you need to make anything work.
Right.
So you can't get these things off the ground unless the mom and pops are thriving and you can give them a proper platform. But as I say, moving from, with this emphasis on essentials as opposed to discretionary, and the shriveling of that market base, the shriveling of the tenant base, these super regionals are coming under a major stress. So what you're going to see now, we're moving into an age where I can see the major shopping centers coming under enormous pressure. And that is going to give rise to a change in leasing structures.
Right.
Because as things stand, the only people left standing will be the major tenancies. And they are bearing a disproportionately low percentage of the revenues required to sustain these big machines. If that is to be rebalanced, you need a new basis on which leases are then structured. And that means that the retailers need to understand that they cannot have their cake, eat it, and beat you in the process. Specifically, the kind of deals that are being done by major tenants like Woolworths, for example.
The soft turnover.
A deal, it's a rental from hell with no growth, and you are in a situation where you are permanently scratching while they thrive at your expense. Those structures don't work any longer. And that needs to change. It's going to take time to actually change. But until we get those structures restructured, so your rentals need to become performance-based.
Right.
And if you as a developer are providing a platform to communicate the retailer to the consumer, then those people need to pay a proper rent. It's fine to do it on the basis that it's performance linked, because there is an incentive for everybody to make those things work.
Sure.
But on the current basis, where people want to shy away from rent percentage turnovers, actually it doesn't work for anybody.
I've heard it said, we always take a view that if you take a shopping centers, you only need to have retailers in there. There's a view which says, could we have other users in a shopping center? Could we have a law firm and then next to it the clothing store? And are we limited? Or do you see shopping centers becoming more, I suppose, the old high street starting to play a bit that role of different uses?
Okay, I think that the art and the science are developing a mall that functions. Is not to put tenants next to each other that kill the retail experience.
Right, okay.
So you never put banks in the mall, or you try never to put the bank in the mall. You try and put them off mall in a banking port. We put them where they belong.
Right.
Services offline. You try and get retailers who will stimulate the turnovers of the tenants adjacent to them, creating a more and more productive environment. But the moment you start seeding the shopping center with all these unproductive elements, doctors, dentists, and others, you're going to kill the environment. So no, I don't see that as a solution. But with the shrinking tenant base that we have now, you're going to have an awful lot of managements that actually don't know any better, who are going to do those horrible things. And they will return us to where we were in the 70s.
It's an interesting point, and I think it's some of the risks that we are facing even in some of our CBDs at the moment, where owners have got empty store and they'll take the first person that comes their way, But you can find yourself bringing in, just from a cash flow perspective, you go to whoever knocks on your door.
In this property space, you're definitely known as one of the big ideas people. And I mean that's disingenuous in the sense that you're not just an ideas person, you've taken a lot of ideas to fruition and implementation, but you're definitely recognized as being a big ideas person as well. What's the difference in your head between a big idea and a pipe dream?
As the architect of both. I think the biggest, or the case in point that you could point to in my career, and there's a caveat coming, so is Ratanga Junction, the theme park.
Interesting. Yeah.
Now, Ratanga Junction has a very interesting genesis. It goes back to when we took over the Century City site. At that time, with Tiger Valley, now jumping through to Belleville, Tiger Valley Shopping Centre was a major catalyst for all the growth that you see between the N1 and moving all the way up through into Durbanville. Tiger Valley was that machine that drove footfall, drove traffic, drove the ability to intercept that traffic, and then you got layers and layers of other businesses and office blocks and what have you. We built about 12 office blocks on the back of, in that area, on the back of Tiger Valley itself. When we took over the Century City site, I needed to get a catalyst into the middle of this thing, which at the time of taking it over was largely flooded with water. It was a big swamp.
That would bring people to the site. Is that what you did?
To actually bring people to the site.
Yeah.
What we had was fabulous exposure on the N1, but we had no access.
Yeah.
There was no way of getting to that site other than going through the back industrial area and coming around. There's no way you were going to do that. So you needed a big vision. I tried to put together, based on the Tiger Valley Shopping Centre model, a big machine in the middle of the Century City site to drive what you see today. All of that stuff is being driven by that singular element. I tried to then get that off the ground by going to all my traditional friends and not so friends in the retail industry, people that I argued with a lot and beat heads with a lot. And they didn't want to hear about the shopping centre. As far as they were concerned, this thing was going to cannibalize the turnovers from Tiger Valley, Sanlam Centre Paro, Cavendish, Tableview, the waterfront. We don't need it. Leave it alone, Martin. We don't want it. So what I did was I designed the shopping centre with roller coasters and major toys built into the center of the shopping center. If you go to Canal Walk at this point, and you go into the food court, you will see that there are very substantial columns sticking out of the ground with television screens on them. They weren't built for television screens because they cost a lot of money. They were built to hold up roller coasters. Okay. We start building the shopping center. I eventually get 2 tenants to break ranks from all the others because all the retailers got together and agreed that thing that Martin wants to build, it's off the table. We're not going to do it. But having built this thing and designed the shopping center that was now over 100,000 square meters of GLA, big machine, lots of excitement, new thinking, roller coasters, all kinds of other toys built into it, this was different. And off we go. And I buy more than 100 million rands worth of, in 25 years ago, money. So we're talking 300-400 million rands today. I buy lots and lots of toys, and we start building the shopping center. Except that the Milnerton Ratepayers Association, represented by an extremely clever advocate, comes to see me and says, this is not going to happen. This thing with the roller coasters is too close to the residential, and we're not going to permit it. And we're going to stop you in your tracks. And you are going to be fighting me, Mr. Wragge. You're going to be fighting me for the next 5 to 10 years of your life. And your shopping center will be stillborn. So here's the deal. Move it, take it away, but it's not going into where the food court in your shopping center is. So this is a major problem. How do I, running a listed company, tell the market, I've ordered 100 million rands of toys, and and I have nowhere to put them. So I take my problem to the board of BOE, and we discuss it, and there's a familiar reaction to this kind of problem. Martin, we don't care what you do, just do it. Make the problem go away. So I eventually moved the toys to a site on the perimeter up against Acerplant Airfield,
Right.
the furthest away from the residential that I could get, and I parked the theme park in that corner.
So it was a compromise.
Absolutely. I had to then negotiate with the ratepayers. You're going to be happy with this?
Right.
Yes. And there's got to be big parking and all of that all the way around. And we don't want to hear those roller coasters going off at 10 o'clock at night as you entertain people. The problem with that is that as a ride park integrated with the shopping center, the one fed on the other. All of the traffic in the malls now perennially, with all the food court elements looking into the roller coasters and people riding and having fun and these massive things shooting out of the building and turning and coming back into the building. That's one thing. As a ride park, it would have worked. But take those elements, insufficient ride capacity. In other words, the units of entertainment capacity were insufficient to sustain a 5 to 7 hour experience. Now you have to bulk it up in order to create a separate destination away from the shopping center, independent completely of the shopping center, and give it a life of its own. So now we have a theme park. It's no longer just a few rides. So the budget goes from 140 million to 360 million. You've now got something that's massively overcapitalized. You've compounded the problem, and you try and make it work. That's not a good experience.
No.
So
no, but it's an interesting case study. I mean,
in the moment that I made that decision to relocate those rides from Canal Walk to an independent location, I lost my company.
Right.
I lost Monix in that moment. So that was a singular decision, and it caused me unmitigated amounts of pain. Unmitigated.
Do you sell bold concepts in this sector? Because you can end up having shopping centers, well, they all look pretty much the same. And is there boldness taking place in this sector? I mean, is there...
You mean today?
Yeah, today.
Well, I think that if you
are we seeing a boldness, or is this so integrated into the financials that we're sitting with a low risk? You know, I mean, you are a visionary. I mean, you're known. I mean, and I think what would be interesting to hear is how do you get big visions done in this sort of sector, you know?
All right. When we did Tiger Valley, that was the first time. Sat down and said, okay, we need to be more than a shopping destination. We need to be more than a collection of shops. We need to be more than connecting stock or merchandise to a consumer.
Was that a bit of shop-attainment thinking at the time?
Yeah, so shop-attainment. So I built the first stage in the middle of Canal Walk. Tiger Valley. Yeah. And that stage was on hydraulics. It went underground, and underground, believe it or not, opposite Clicks, where Clicks probably still is, there is a round stage with seating in the round around it, tiered seating. That stage used to be able to, I don't know, I think they just switched the thing off. You go down, underneath there were change rooms, there were facilities to actually bring a grand piano onto the stage, bring dancing girls, bring whatever you want, bring the stage up and entertain the consumer. Those kind of layers, those extra dimensions that create a better bond, and this is essential in today's thinking now, a better bond between the consumer and his relationship with that ship, that entity. You need that to be a good thing. It goes beyond just being able to buy merchandise. It is a destination. And if you're going to hold people and keep them coming back and create that bond at the expense of others, then you need to do those kind of bold things. The problem is, exactly, but the moment the developer's role stops, and you have a management team that move in, driven by, typically, institutional investment. The institutions, they just want to see a return. What do? They switch off all the toys. They stop all of those performances. The guy that sat there for years playing the grand piano in the middle of Tiger Valley, he would sit there, and I hired him to play 4 hours a day. So he would come and he would play the piano. It was simply there to feed our customers with good stuff. They switched him off.
So how do you maintain? I remember we had a discussion some time ago with Urquhart Woods about Umschlanger. And I remember him making the statement is that you almost need to have a group of people who stay with the concept going forward, that you actually lose those individuals at some point. And exactly your point, that the new investor walks in. And,
what they do is they immediately go in, and the guys in the front line are immediately pushed to simply drive the bottom line or the top line. And they lose the view, they lose the understanding. You know, real estate is a social science. A social science. If you want to succeed, if you want your assets to perform, if you want to sweat them, you have to embrace your consumer and love them. And if you stop loving them, they will stop loving you.
So to circle back then, so are you saying that a good idea then still has that, how can I call it, a sort of solid underlying rationale beneath it, and the pipe dream doesn't?
Can I just say, there are so many years of effort associated with putting a major project on the ground. Take Tiger Valley. Tiger Valley, 3 years in gestation, getting all the tenancies together, getting options on the ground. My options on the Tiger Valley site failed 6 times because I got them for 6 months. Then I renewed for 6 months. Each time the price went up. Then I renewed for 6 months. And slowly I built to a head of steam. In the final analysis, after 3 years of effort, I made the gate on Tiger Valley by 5 minutes. Wolfie Sessman was standing at the door, waiting to sign for the land to take everything that I had created away with him to Liberty Life. I'd been to Liberty to get them to fund, and they said no. And then they watched. And as I built up a head of steam and I got all the tenants together and the designs together and the approvals, etc., we got the final signature from Eskom Pension Fund. And I delivered my option performance 5 minutes before I lost it. It was nerve-wracking. The issue is that you really can't afford in this day and age to go for a major project unless you go there with everything. Yeah. And it takes 3 years to put it together, Tiger Valley. And then it took me 30 months to build it and to bring it on stream. By the time you've actually got the thing stabilized, you're talking about 7 years. Right. So you've got a 7-year investment in putting something together. So frivolous, opportunistic, there's no time for that. If you're going to do something, you have to do it. Yeah. And I mean, do it with total conviction. Ratanga was, if you like, my midlife nemesis. And it caused me unbelievable pain and misery. But apart from Ratanga, I don't have too many of those kind of things.
I mean, it's a frank discussion. And I think what I always find interesting in property is how risk is perceived sometimes so differently by the developer, the banker, the city. You know, you have people with all very different risk profiles, very different, and how one gets that going. But anyway, Rob.
A follow-on from that, and I'm always intrigued, especially when you have quite large projects, projects that maybe sort of break out of the mold. It's often the kind of the second player is the one that sort of actually makes work. So you look at London, at Docklands, that whole Canary Wharf, etc. And so it's not just a South African thing. You look at Melrose Arch, or take another Canal Walk. So Century City could be, but another. Do you think? But the reason for that is because of what you described earlier on, the lack of follow through of the team having the same. So the people who started the idea who are committed to the idea, then being able to follow through. If that breaks, then it falls apart.
I think that's very...
Paul Wragge, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know if we have time to have that discussion, but I can tell you what happened at Monex. Because essentially what happened there was the Monex business was going along very successfully. All of the other dimensions. The fact that we had too many dimensions is a debatable issue because we were suddenly involved in all kinds of things. And I'm guilty of that. But that's a separate story. Each of these little businesses were making money in their own right. Ratanga came on stream. It bombed badly. In our first full operating year, we lost 65 million rand. And it caused havoc. We had incredible growth in earnings. We were reporting earnings of between 75 and 300% growth per annum on a compounding basis. So it was massive. Comes Ratanga and it just chewed the heart out of everything. Concurrently with that, our major shareholder at the time, BOE, had gone off on a roadshow some little while, somewhat in parallel with us, because we went off on a roadshow and we raised 1.8 billion rand to fund Ratanga, inter alia, and the shopping centre. BOE goes and raises a huge quantity of money. I seem to recall about 7 billion. They then apply those funds to investments in all kinds of things that perhaps they shouldn't have been in. But there were other disparate businesses that they saw opportunities in, but those opportunities didn't necessarily mature. Suddenly BOE is in trouble. The market is looking at it and saying, hey, these guys have lost focus. These guys need to get back to basics. Are you in a financial institution or are you not? What are you? Concurrently with that, Ratanga hits the streets. I then have to reduce the number of employees in Ratanga to try and right-size the overhead. Big headlines, massive layoffs of staff at Ratanga. The market is now reading disaster. Actually, the Monex business is doing fine, save and except for Ratanga, but Ratanga is a big negative. BOE is looking at this thing saying, this thing, we need to get rid of Premier Milling, we need to get rid of this one and that one, and they're trying to sell off all of these disparate businesses that they've invested huge amounts of money in. And they decide in their wisdom, Monex needs to disappear. This is in fact what happens, where in fact there becomes a misalignment between the objectives of the management, and you've got a big shareholder actually who has his own problems, the scale of which I wasn't fully aware of. Right at the end, Tom Boardman said to me, Martin, you have to listen to this problem from my perspective. I've got Nedbank on my ass. He had Nedbank all over him. And he was just trying to do what he could to survive as BOE. He didn't give a rat's ass about Monex. So hence, Monex, unfortunately, hit a brick wall. And that was very sad, because it was a lovely machine. Right, moving on.
Okay. Martin, just to look ahead a bit, and I think we've done a bit of that already, but are we going to see more regional shopping centres in South Africa? Is this what do you see? I mean, I think we've spoken a bit about e-retailing. We've spoken. I mean, where do you see the South African property market going forward in the next 5-10 years? If you were to take a view where we are as a country, urbanization, where do you see this going? Yeah.
Okay, I think first of all, the market. Super regionals require a very wide catchment area, big catchment area, in order to suck up as much customers they can. This gives rise to fairly extensive driving times, and those driving times, when I was doing my math for Canal Walk, etc., we were talking happily about 35 minutes, etc., etc. I think that those driving times now have shrunk dramatically. COVID has accelerated this process. The work from home ethic or future has shrunk that down, and I see the future being very much closer to home. So close by,
So
community-sized neighborhood shopping center, even neighborhood shopping centers with essentials are going to become much more the norm. And I don't see a role, I don't see a place for any more super regionals.
But do you see a role, for example, standalone? I mean, stores. I mean, there's been talk in the US, a bit the typical US where you got the McDonald's and then you have the PC, where you're not in a mall, but you drive up to the store.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I see those things working, especially for very focused, again, essential retail. And standing operations that are going to feed you and give you what you want very quickly. But in terms of the discretionary end of things, that's where the major pain and misery is going to be, the shrinking of those businesses. I think that's because if you're working from home, who do you need to impress? You don't no longer need a tie and a suit and all of these other things. Your needs shrink, and suddenly, you know what? It's quite cool to be able to go and visit your friend Francois in a pair of jeans. You don't need any more. How many jeans do you need?
Well, exactly.
Exactly. So the discretionary end of this, I think, is simply going to shrink, and that's where a lot of pain is going to be taken.
In the US, you have these discount shopping centers, these malls. It's never quite worked in South Africa.
They've all had their time, and it's not that their time has necessarily gone. I do get a sense that people's spending or consumption habits are becoming narrower in their application. How much stuff do you need? And I think people are buying less stuff and realizing that other things are more important. Quality of life, having a bit of lawn, a nice home, furnishing well. We've had the advent, if you like, the dispersion of work, first of all, work from home, pushing work into the home. But you've now got the dispersion through streamers like Netflix of entertainment. You don't need to go to the cinemas any longer. So the cinema chains, you think about that as a dinosaur. Think about that.
What do we do with them?
Well, think about it in Canal Walk, for example. There were originally 20 screens. We built 20 screens originally for the original operator, which became New Metro. Those screens, those are huge, cavernous holes with sloping floors in dense concrete that you can't dig out without ripping the entire structure apart. Because the floor, there isn't a subfloor, there isn't a flat horizontal surface. Everything's built like this to accommodate the seating. So you are looking at a nightmare. Now that applies to all the shopping centers, regionals in particular, across the country, wherever there are cinemas. I see the cinema industry collapsing worldwide. Theatrical, I'm talking about theatrical cinemas as in we know it. So the streamers are going to continue to grow, and at the expense of everything else.
Do you think that the changing structure of the South African property market has had a role here? And with that, I mean, certainly in the 90s, we had the pension funds playing an important, and some people have argued that was sort of patient money. They could do certain things. And yes, maybe you were blowing policyholders' money. But we now have a REIT structure, which needs to almost respond quarterly. Do you think that this changing structure has, I don't know if you have any views on that, has that altered what we're dealing with? Or
I'm sure it is, but I'm not necessarily qualified to comment. I would go back to basics, right back to the core. Where does the revenue come from? And if in fact that is uncertain, what holds that revenue or is waiting for that revenue, those elements are in trouble.
Exactly.
I see the super regionals in this country as taking major strain.
Interesting.
Martin, you've worked in different parts of the world. You've worked in South Africa, you've been involved in projects in the rest of the continent, the UK, China. What are your experiences of working in those different contexts? Is there a difference to doing a project in South Africa, UK versus China?
Yes, there very much so. A pet peeve of mine in the UK is health and safety. I've finished building a shopping centre in the UK 2 years ago, and the health and safety requirements were such that they seemed to consume every reasonable dollar in the production process. And what it led to was people endlessly getting dressed and undressed on site in working time into outfits that made them look like spacemen in order to climb up a ladder 3 feet. So working, I found in Britain, extremely frustrating. Productivity, which should be off the kazoo because you're in a first world environment, productivity is low because if you've got 6 people doing a job, 5 of them on their cell phones, and there's one guy chipping away in the corner. We built 9 screens in the shopping centre. By my estimation, we should have built that or completed it in 7 months. It took 2.5 years. There were more people in the management office writing up claims and getting clever than there were actually people on site building.
By the way, in China, where you're in the opposite.
in China, there are other challenges. But there's an interesting thing about rentals. I want to come back to rentals. I think it's quite interesting. I sat on a committee with the CEO of Inter Alia, celebrated company now in liquidation or near liquidation or anyway. I was promoting the fact that we needed, in South Africa, this is what we do, but what we need here in Britain, which you are not doing, guys, and which actually needs to change, we need performance-based rental structures. A basic rental if you can get it, and a percentage of turnover. But become a partner with your tenant, and that gives you an incentive to actually make sure your tenant has the best possible opportunity to connect with his consumer. Right. You're invested every day in every promotion, in everything, so that the shopping center as such is a singular business. My regard for those shopping center precincts from Canal Walk, Tiger Valley, whatever, this is my business. And my business doesn't stop because one little tenant isn't doing it. If he's not doing his job, I'm going to make him do his job, or he's going to get ripped out of there and into the cold. CEO of Intu at the time, he said, no. He said, we don't do that. We don't do that.
25-year lease.
We want, we've got a nice lease. We want our rent, and we're happy with that. And this business of getting involved with your tenants, I mean, that's simply not what we do. We own the building. The tenant runs his business. And I found that archaic in the extreme. I mean, here in SA, we are much more advanced than that. We understand what you need to do. People like Lenny Bentel and Dennis Abrams right at the beginning, these were guys who were intrinsically traders.
Well, and
they could feel it. Mark Wayner, Wolfie, etc. All of these guys. We understood what we needed to do. And I think that there's a big difference. In China, I found an environment in which everybody was performance-based. So all tenants were on performance. But it's very sophisticated. It was even then, and this goes back to the year 2001, where all the terminals in the shopping center were connected to the management office. Every single trader, as they're selling an item, that rings up in the management office. So you have direct connection to sales. And the Chinese are they are operators. They milk everything. And that's how it should be. Yeah. But the problem is they don't listen very well. And they still build structures which are weird, and they go off to America with their camera, they take photographs of all the things they can steal, they come back, they then implement based on what their perception is, without really understanding. actually the distribution of a mall is not as simple as it looks. There is a thing that is happening to you. As you walk down a mall, there are things that your consumer is going through as an emotional journey. And if you don't hit all those buttons at the right time, if you don't switch on all the switches, they are not in buying mode. If you want to separate them from their money in crude terms.
You can have a high pedestrian count, but no one's buying.
High pedestrian count. So they would build shopping centres and then come to me and say, we've got the shopping centre. It works very well over here in this portion, but this portion doesn't work at all. We think that that's wrong. Something's got to be wrong. So we've got to fix it. So how do we fix it? Well, you shouldn't have built it like that in the first place. So there's very little thing. China was interesting. China was a very separate experience. The opposite rule there is, if you want to make a small fortune in China, take a big fortune.
Your advice from your years of experience to some new entrants into the market, the skills of a good property professional? I mean, it sounds a bit vague. I mean, you can enter in all sorts of sectors.
Load up on accountancy and law.
Right.
And then stay close to home. You don't need to gallivant around the planet looking for rainbows. There's enough money close to home. Be focused.
I think it's interesting. So you're saying know your hood. Know your
hood. Milk your backyard.
Martin Wragge, thank you very much for being with us. It's not for nothing that we've invited you here as a legend, a thinker. I think there's much to be learned, and thank you very much for the honesty in this discussion. Thank you very much on behalf of the team.
Thank you, Francois.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Great.